Is this your first meeting like this?
This is, no, it's the third or fourth.
Oh, okay. I think everything that you had in there interests me, so I don't have anything specific. I don't know what your format is.
I like that you're setting the bar low for me, Mary. I appreciate it. I feel like I have a really good chance at success.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm already impressed. Right.
And I will share I'll have slides. I'll share the deck with you through Meetup after it's over. Oh. And then I'm recording it. So if you want to see the recording as well, we can, I'll share that as well. I'll send around a link for that. I probably won't do that until tomorrow, but just so you know. So let me start by sharing my screen, and we'll slowly start this process as people are still, what's the word? Coming in, joining, yeah. Okay, so just so you know, I think you can tell I am not the most formal person in the world. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to, you can put them in the chat and I will try to pay attention to that. If I don't notice, just feel free to interrupt me. I do have a lot to cover. I will do my best to get everything in on time. And I guess those are the main things that I wanted to cover. I really hope you enjoy tonight, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to enjoy doing it. So hopefully that will make it easier for you to enjoy listening to me talk about this. This happens to be, if not my favorite topic in the world, maybe one of my top two. So, okay. So we've got a few more people I'm letting in. That's the only reason I'm waiting a little bit, is just because it's distracting when new people want to come in. But so let's start with the sharing. Let's do that. Okay, so you can, I'm assuming you can see my screen. I'll take that as a yes. A few nods would be great. Awesome. Thank you, Brian. So again, if you feel comfortable sharing your, showing your face, that would be great. It's so much more interesting for me to talk to humans than it is to talk to letters, just in case you're curious. So that would be great. Sarah was kind enough to smile there. I appreciate that you're gonna be a great audience member, I can tell right away. Okay, so let's start. So we're gonna talk today about why self-care is more than meditation. And really what I'm gonna focus on are why self-care is important, how to think about self-care, the key ways to think about self-care, and how you can begin to implement it in your daily life. So we should probably start with just like who I am. So like this is me, I'm me, as we know, I'm Jeremy. So the reason I am qualified to sit here in front of you and talk about this is because I have two master's degrees. I have one in social work and I have another in family therapy. I also have I'm already cracking myself up, which is probably a really good sign for the rest of you, but it must be a little distracting. So I'm also a certified life coach. I've been writing, I've been publishing, I've been doing workshops for a very long time, probably in the neighborhood of 30 years or so. And I also have done the work myself. And so I think that's where Thanks, Candy. That's where I really think the value lies, is that this is stuff that I learned to do on my own because I have found it to be so helpful in changing my life for the better. So that's really why I like talking about it, because I think it will really help. And so if you have any questions about that, let me know. Hopefully my passion will come through, and my nervousness will maybe not come through as much. So that'll be good. Right now, I am just trying to share with you a link to sign up for my free self-care guide. So I think about this stuff a lot. I've put together a self-care guide that's free. All you have to do is just sign up. And I promise I'm not gonna spam you or anything like that. It would kind of defeat the whole purpose of being like a nice guy and then getting your email and then being obnoxious and nasty. So I promise I try to practice what I preach. So, but in this self-care guide, I go into some of the details that are here, but I also go into more information, specifics about how you can begin to, as I like to think about it, weave these tools into your own life. So I'll remind you later on, but if you want to take a look at that and sign up, I'll send that to you either tonight or tomorrow. That's me. So let's talk about self-care and why self-care is important. And there we go. Nope, that's not what I wanted. So let's think about self-care and kind of two ways that will help you understand better why it's so crucial. So I have two ways of thinking about it here. One is backpack theory, and the other is soul points. So I'm going to talk about backpack theory. Backpack theory is something I sort of figured out, again, like 30 years ago. I was in my mid-20s. I was really depressed. And I figured out that I was interacting with people and getting weights. It was like every interaction with someone, there'd be some sort of wound or slight that would happen. And it was like they were slipping me a weight that would go into my backpack that I was carrying. And at the end of the day, the backpack is so heavy, right? And you put it down and then you go to sleep and then you wake up, and without doing anything, without any kind of self-care, you're putting that backpack on and the backpack weighs exactly the same, except then you're going about your day and you're adding more weights to it. So one way of thinking about the need for self-care is the weights that we carry. The other part is thinking about it in terms of like a battery or soul points, right? So there are things that we do, interactions that we have, experiences that we have, that either charge us up, like replenish our soul points, or take away our soul points. And so, a difficult conversation with your boss, right? You lose soul points. Watching a sunset, for me particularly, I'm charged up 100%. So it's really about noticing the things that weigh us down and the things that drain us, so that we can then begin to realize, okay, this is what I need, right? First, this first step is just beginning to understand, what do you need from self-care, right? That's the kind of tricky part and the somewhat complicated part about self-care. Doing self-care isn't that hard. Figuring out what kind of self-care you need is the trick. And that's really what we'll be focusing on today. So one of the things that we'll start talking about is, how do you start relieving yourself of these weights, or doing things that charge you up. So another way of thinking about self-care is the difference between restoration and regulation. And so we go through life and like stuff happens to us all the time, right? in our society, particularly with phones and all of the things that we have, we're very much moving from one thing to another, to another, to another. We're very rarely getting rest. We're very rarely taking breaks. There's always this sense of needing to keep moving on to whatever's next. When we're thinking about what it is that we need, whether it's because we're carrying too much weight or because too much has drained us, we want to think about, well, what do we need in order to feel better? Do we need regulation, which is essentially, think of it as calming, right? We've been moving too much. I don't know if you ever kind of like, you just like are moving so much, your hands feel like they're trembling a bit, right? Like you're just moving so much, your energy is going, it feels like even when you stop, you're still vibrating. That's not a sign that you need to move more. That's a sign that you need to move less. That's where regulation comes in. That's where we start thinking about things like deep breathing and other breathing exercises and things that ground us, right? Or even things like stretching, which are nice ways to move our body, but do it gently and respectfully of where we're at in that moment. The other way is restoration, right? So another good example of that is, this is where people will do things like exercise. This is where people will think about, getting together with close friends who they feel really comfortable with. This is also just like physical things like eating and sleeping, which are incredibly important and count as self-care. So again, we're kind of just going through the different ways to think about self-care and how to be able to notice what you might need in terms of doing self-care for yourself, which I guess doing self-care for others would be weird because then it wouldn't be called self-care. So we'll move on from that before we think too much. I might try to edit that out of the recording if I can. Okay, so let's see what's next. So I'm trying to give you this kind of big picture of how self-care works. Self-care comes across as like this really simple thing that we can do. And the acts of self-care are very simple, but the needs behind self-care are much more complicated. And I think the more that you understand what those needs are and being aware of what your needs happen to be in that moment allows you to take certain self-care activities and know, oh, this works for when I feel this way, and this works for when I feel this way, right? One self-care act is not going to be perfect for every single need that you have. And so what I want you to be able to develop is a toolkit, right? You want to have a whole slew of resources that you can turn to when you need some extra self-care. So let's review the dimensions real quick. They're going to make sense to you when you think about them. Physical, right? Like that's the health of our body. Emotional, that's our feelings. Cognitive, that's our mental state, right? And that can be very different than our feelings, right? We can be cognitively, mentally drained. We can also be emotionally drained. We can also be both at the same time, but they are different. It can be relational in the sense that we're feeling, whether it's lonely or we're just feeling a need to be connected to other people. It's environmental, right? I mean, the power of being in nature and experiencing nature. For me, I'll say this probably 100 times, so I'll just apologize in advance, but sunsets are magic for me. I can go to the beach, I can look at a sunset, and I am just going to feel 99.5% of the time much better when that is over. I know that works for me. I try to make it part of my weekly process. And thank you for understanding, Leah. And then there's a protective part of it, which is also this, and then we don't think about this as much as self-care too, but this is the setting boundaries. This is the ability to say no. This is advocating for what you want or what you need. So when it's not just about, right, like, oh, I should do some self-care because that's good for me. It's really figuring out what are the dimensions that I feel need more attention, need more support, need more restoration or regulation, right? Anybody have any questions so far? Does this all make sense? I hope, because I've been speaking English. I've been practicing. Okay, cool. I love the responses. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna think back on this, and I'm gonna think about the number of times that I've said so, and it's gonna be a little painful for me. Self-care. Let's think about it in terms of integration and not obligation, right? The idea is not that self-care is another thing on your to-do list, because the last thing we need self-care to be is for it to be pressure. It kind of defeats the purpose of helping to calm ourselves and take care of ourselves. So what that means is we need to figure out a way to, sorry, I got distracted by Amanda's question. Amanda's question, the answer is no. The self-care guide is different. It has some of this, but it also has other stuff that this doesn't have. So self-care integration, what we're really thinking about is how do you weave self-care, and actually the self-care guide goes into this a bit more. How do you weave self-care into your life, right? So the way that I think about it, and some of this can be really, really small, but a good example for me is that I have an issue with my calves. I need to stretch my calves. I almost never remember, even if I am in the house all day long, I almost never remember to stretch my calves. It's frustrating and annoying. But what I've been able to do is tie stretching my calves with brushing my teeth. So when I brush my teeth, I stretch my calves. It's a 2-for-1 deal, really, right? But that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. I understand stretching my calves is very small, but it's the idea that we're not looking to add another hour to your day. We're looking to find the time you already have and use that to better care for yourself. So whether that's on your commute, whether that's learning how to take 3-minute breaks between meetings, whether it's, promising to actually take lunch and take a break and using that break not just to scroll through your phone, but to do things that replenish you, whether that's listening to music, whether it's writing, whether it's exercise, whether it's sitting in the grass. Again, whatever it is, these are the kinds of things that you'll need to figure out what works best for you. But that's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of weaving it into your day. It's easy to think that when things are going well, we don't need to do self-care as much, but that's not really true because stuff is building up all the time. It's just that, it's like if you're carrying around, I saw this professor give this example. If you hold a glass of water for 2 minutes, that glass of water is not going to weigh very much at all. If you hold that glass of water for 2 hours, your arm is going to start to get tired. It's the same amount. It's just that the length of time that we're holding on to it takes a toll on us. And that's the same kind of thing with these weights that we carry. Okay, maybe 20 pounds is not that big of a deal. But when you're carrying around 20 pounds all day long, every day, it does take a toll, even if in the beginning it doesn't feel like it. So if you're doing maintenance work, essentially, the way I think about like self-care maintenance, which is doing something on a daily basis to help process these weights, or to recharge yourself, then when things do get rough, you're in a better place to be able to implement more self-care and take better care of yourself. Whereas if you're not doing something on a regular basis, that weight becomes almost too much to handle. And those are those moments where we feel like we're breaking down or we feel like we can't do anymore, right? And so, and I think the other piece, and I've touched on this a little bit, but the other piece to really think about is that what works for me works for me. It may not work for you. And that's the other key in terms of self-care, is figuring out what it is. And that the self-care guide that I don't mean to be pitching it so much, but just as an example of the distinction, especially because it's free. But an example is like I have a couple ways of thinking about finding out what works for you, so that you can find the things that you have, and then you have this sheet of paper that basically says, okay, here are some self-care things that work for me. That's really what you need, right? You don't need my self-care ideas, right? I mean, maybe they're helpful, but we know they work for me, and we don't know if they'll ever work for anyone else, right? It's not that it's a set thing that works as self-care. It's that self-care is something that works for us. So someone else may get bored watching a sunset. Not me. Like that, it's not my experience, right? Someone else may hate dark chocolate. Not me. That is not a problem. I have lots of problems in the world. Liking dark chocolate is not one of them. I love dark chocolate. That is very helpful. So again, just sort of thinking about that you want to keep doing this on a regular basis. You want to try and weave it into your day, and you want to do what works for you specifically versus just some generic self-care things. And this may mean exploring. It may mean experimenting and trying stuff and going, yeah, that didn't really do anything for me, until you find something that does. Okay, hope that made sense. So going back to a little bit, thank you. I love this feedback. You guys are awesome. So one of the things to really think about, again, is we've talked about how to envision, right? You have like give a picture about how the lack of self-care looks like, whether it's weights, whether it's soul points, right? And then we're thinking about what kinds of self-care, and we're thinking about the dimensions of self-care. But we also need to think about, how do you assess where you're at in your need for self-care? So here are some key questions to think about, right? What feels particularly heavy in your backpack right now? So I'll just give you an example for my life. I recently moved. I'm in a new state. I think I know one person in this state, but they live about 4 hours away. And so I don't have much of a social life right now. I'm going to build it. It's going to take some time. So loneliness is a weight that I'm carrying. And that's a tough one. That, like, for me, that's a heavy one, partly because, and this is the other thing about weights, is that if you had a difficult childhood, you have weights from then too. So you're not starting with an empty backpack. You're starting with a backpack that's already heavy from the weights that you carry from your childhood. And then you have these day-to-day interactions, which add weights, et cetera, et cetera. For me, loneliness is a tie to my past. And so that's a particularly heavy weight. But I know that. It's pretty obvious because I don't see other humans except like this. So I know that I'm not seeing people. And so I'm aware of it. So I've been doing extra to take care of myself. What specific activities or situations have been draining your soul points lately? So thankfully, right now, I'm in a really good situation, except for the fact that I don't know a single soul, in that I have made some decisions in my life that have put me in a situation where I am trying to live the life that I've always wanted to live. That's very exciting. So I've weeded out a lot of the stuff that weighs me down, or that drains my soul points. Thanks, Candy. But right, like most of us, like if you had asked me a month ago, I would have had a number of things that were draining me on a regular basis. And so how do we deal with that? How do we process that? So this is, again, something that we'll talk more about, but like, how do you begin to figure out what helps you feel better? So like for me, I know about an hour before this started, I put on upbeat music that I really like. It gives me energy. That's something that reliably will give me an emotional boost. I'm not going to tell you who it was now because that's a whole other story. I've been really personal already. And so I'm enjoying this conversation that Sarah and I are having right now. So, okay, so there's that. So how does your approach to self-care differ when life feels good versus when it feels challenging? I'll tell you, for me, it doesn't differ all that much. I spend a lot of time every day on self-care, and I connect that directly to the fact that I had a difficult childhood. I'm already dealing with weights that I was essentially born with. Do you know what I mean? But I think for most people, when you're thinking about your daily life, again, it may not feel like you need self-care, but you would benefit from self-care because it acts as a preventative for when things do get more stressful. So if you are always carrying around 20 pounds in your backpack, and then you have a huge project at work or an argument with your partner or whatever it is, and now you're carrying around 50 pounds, that's huge. If you're dealing with that 20 pounds though, on a regular basis, when you add that extra 30, it's not as big. And then it's a little bit more manageable. And that's how I think about it. That's what really helps me think about it. Prevention is huge. I know it's so much easier to think about life in terms of, well, I don't have to worry about that yet. And I get that. I always had to worry about it. So I've learned to, I mean, every single day I do many different things for self-care because I know when things get tough, I'll have a much better chance of dealing with it. For a good chunk of my younger life, I didn't do that. And when rough times hit, they were almost debilitating. I don't have that anymore, thankfully. Are there items in your backpack that you could temporarily set down or share with someone else? So, sometimes the people in our lives, usually not even on purpose, will give us their weights, right? They'll put their stresses on us. And because we're good people and we're kind and we're sensitive, like, okay, Dan, I'll talk more about that. So I knew that was going to happen. Give me 1 second. Wrap my brain around. Okay. Nope, it's gone. It's totally gone. What were we talking about?
When we were, yeah. When we get other people's.
Like, we're just having this conversation, you and me, Sarah, and everyone else happens to be listening in, which is great. So let's say we have a fight with a colleague, but the colleague is like, it's a ridiculous fight. They're upset about something. They're clearly overwhelmed with stress, and they're just kind of unleashing because their stress level is so high, right? That adds weight to our backpack, but it's not our weight to carry. So we can process that weight, realize, oh, wait a second, this actually isn't mine. I'm just carrying it because that's what I do when people give me stress. I take it. And then you can look at it and go, okay, wait a second, this is not for me. I'm going to put that down. You don't actually have to give it back to them, just as long as you're not carrying it around, right? That's all that matters. Yeah, so thinking about that, right? And also just, you have a fight with your partner or whatever it is, they say something really mean, they clearly didn't meant it, but it still upsets you, right? You can have a conversation with them about that, let them know that it bothered you. Hopefully they're a good person too, and they apologize, and that weight has been processed, and you're not carrying that either. Does that all make sense? I know I momentarily lost my train of thought there, but we've got it back.
It does make sense, Jeremy, but that's if you let it in your backpack though, right? Like what if your boss, okay, he's stressed out, my boss is stressed out, and just the example that you gave, I'm not going to let it affect me because I learned not to, how to do that.
So you mean you
and
have
sometimes
boundaries?
it can't be helped. Sometimes it can't be helped. It will happen, but like, how about not letting it in your backpack at all? Like, saying I'm not going to accept it.
You're steps ahead of me on this one, okay? Like, of course, like that's exactly what you should do. You should set a protective boundary, right? That part of that 6 dimensions of self-care. You should set that protective boundary, and when that happens, realize, oh, that's his stuff. I don't need to worry about that. And if you can do that, that's great. Unfortunately,
right. Like I said, it can't be done all. It can't be done all the time. So this,
but every time you do that, you are preventing yourself from carrying an extra weight.
Nice.
So that's great.
Yeah, I like the backpack thing. It makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Sure. Hi, Allie.
Hi, Jeremy. I just want to mention that the poet Robert Bly has a whole thing about the black bag. And he says that the black bag is like where all our shame goes and our anger and, all the negative traumatic experiences we've had. And when we start out and we're little, the black bag is very small. But as we get older, it gets huge and, we're dragging it behind us and it's really heavy. And I'm just going to read a quote. He says, "We spend our life until we're 20 deciding what parts of ourselves to put in the bag. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to get them out of the bag again." So, yeah. And I think it's also about shedding the parts of yourself that you've inherited that aren't really about you. And just unpacking that stuff and traveling light if you can.
I mean, you went deep there, Allie. That was good. First of all, I can't believe I'm ending up with a reading assignment after this.
Oh, well.
I got to go take a look at this. That's excellent. But yeah, absolutely. Like, this is I don't want to say it's surface level because that makes it seem so unimportant, but this is this is essentially like the outer layer of our skin, right? And what you're starting to talk about is like the more deeper levels in terms of self-awareness and personal growth that really make a difference in changing our lives. I think, like, my experience has been that for most people, starting to think about self-care is an introduction to getting to a place that you're talking about, Allie. It's just that most people, we don't teach about self-awareness and personal growth when people are growing up. It's not a priority in the way that we think of things like math, even though I use my mental health so much more than I ever use math. But we'll put that aside for the moment, right? So I'm completely with you, Allie. I don't know how to express my complete solidarity with what you said more than this. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to taking a look at that. The long bag we drag behind us. Okay. So we've talked about what self-care is. We've talked about where the types of self-care in terms of, do we want regulation? Do we want restoration? We've thought about the different dimensions that we can do self-care in terms of helping ourselves. So now we can really look at some examples, and I think Dan brought this up. Here are some of the examples that we use, and I'll talk a little bit about what I like the most personally. But again, this is personal preference. The reason I try to give lots of examples is because I want you to have a starting point, if you haven't done a lot of this yet, to be able to go, okay, well, for physical, stretching didn't work, but getting rest does, or, whatever it is, right? I think you'll find more of that distinction or the differences in the things like, particularly in the emotional areas. What are the things that actually help you feel better, help you process your emotions? People do that. Like, that's a totally personal preference thing. So there's certainly been times in my life where crying has been really, really valuable. And knowing that I've set aside time to cry and let myself express those feelings that frankly didn't have language. I didn't have a language to be able to express. That is really powerful. But I love writing. And so writing is really big. And just to kind of throw you a bit of a curveball, another workshop that I run regularly is interactive journaling with AI, and using it for mental health and mental health support and personal growth. And that is a whole other fun thing that I am into. And so I'll give you some more information about that through the meetup. So you can, if you want to join that ever. So again, we're looking at these 6 dimensions. Sorry, Dan, go ahead. You're still muted, I think. Do you want to type it out? Well, we'll come back to you because we still can't hear you. I'm sorry. So let's go into some of these other examples. So we've got the 6 dimensions, right? You can't really see them all at one time, but these are the six dimensions of self-care, right? We're talking about physical, we've got emotional, right? We've talked about that a little bit. Talking to someone safe, practicing self-compassion. I cannot emphasize enough how important self-compassion is. And this is a skill that I've only learned within the last year and a half. Yeah, Dan. So it's a skill I've only learned in the last year and a half, but it has done a dramatic change in my life. And this is beyond just regular self-care. Like, this is starting to get to like some of the deeper stuff that Ali was talking about earlier. Self-compassion is really important because we're not taught to take care of ourselves, but we're the only ones that really can do that. And so this is a whole other avenue to go down that I will try to not go down too far. But cognitive behavioral therapy has a really good approach where they talk about that thoughts are not facts. The things that we think are not real. They're just thoughts. It doesn't mean that they're true. And that, particularly in our society, is a really hard thing for people to comprehend. But once you start to realize that you have so many thoughts, most of them are just strange, weird, crazy things, that you can then begin to change your thoughts. And by changing your thoughts, you can then change your actions. That's the whole triangle of cognitive behavioral therapy, which again, I'm going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but the whole idea is to bring us back to the idea that if we can change the way we think in terms of being more self-compassionate, the mistakes we make, the problems we have, the challenges we face will all be easier because we won't be paying attention and believing the sometimes nasty voices that are in our heads. I think Dan got disconnected, so hopefully he will come back and then I will address his question. But so in the meantime, let's go on to cognitive. So that kind of connects with what I was just talking about, reframing a thought. So thinking about a thought. So, I mean, just a silly example, but the last time I did this workshop, for some reason, I must have done something. I must have not announced it properly through Meetup because no one RSVP'd. But this time, 150 people RSVP'd. There are things in life that I just don't understand, and I've accepted that that's one of them. But once it started to get like into the 50s, I started to like feel more anxious about it. It's like, oh my goodness, there's going to be so many people. What am I going to do? But I was able to reframe those thoughts. Like, I love this stuff. I think you can tell I love this stuff. I could sit and talk about this for hours. It's going to be tough for me to stop at 8 o'clock. You know what I mean? Like, this is good for me. Like, I love this. So if there's going to be more people, there's going to be more people. That's reframing, right? We have this initial thought that's maybe negative or certainly not positive, but we can grab that thought, we can put it aside and replace it with a better thought because we control our thought. Let's see. Oh, I love doing puzzles, like jigsaw puzzles. I've also been obsessed with doing word games lately. It's like, I don't know. So you can only see me. Thankfully, you don't need to see the where I'm living. But over there, there is a, I did that just for you, Sarah. Over there, there is a couch. And that's where I go sit and I go do a word puzzle when I need to like calm down and let my brain relax a little bit. And I'll do this a couple times, not a couple, I'll do this a few times during the day because I know that if I push myself too hard, it will be too much. So I take breaks. But instead of just like scrolling on my phone and not doing anything, I like get into this kind of quasi-meditative state of doing a word puzzle. And I feel better afterwards. Awesome, Mary. Great. So, and then relational, and I'm going to move through this a little more quickly because I am, in case you didn't notice, verbose. So relational, reaching out to someone, setting a boundary like Mary was talking about, attending an activity. I am huge into the environmental stuff. I am very much about, being outside when I can, about seeing nature, seeing wild animals, seeing the beach, seeing sunsets, water, just any water. I'm even enjoying rain, which is clearly a sign that maybe things have gone too far. But like whatever sort of natural thing it is, I feel better. And that's something that has only really come about. I think I've always felt that way, but it has only really made a much bigger impact on my life in the last few years. And then that protective stuff. So, and I think protective stuff also involves things like turning off notifications, right? Like I'm very picky about what gets to notify me on my phone. I've spent maybe 7 months without any news alerts on my phone because I just couldn't do it anymore. The way that I think about it is I'll deal with the news when I'm ready to deal with the news. I don't want the news to deal with me and me respond to that, particularly if I'm not ready. And that I think is a huge thing that I love talking about too, is choice, right? Part of self-care is making choices to prioritize ourselves and our mental health in a way that is different, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't pay attention to the news, but it's not easy. And we need to find a way that to do it or not do it, frankly, that works for us. Same thing with like thinking about how you schedule things. I used to work at a job where I would get scheduled for so many meetings. So I scheduled 12 to 2. I blocked it out on my calendar every single day so that no one would schedule me then. And then that way I always knew I had these 2 hours so I could grab lunch at some point in that time period. And I would have at least some downtime during the day. Again, it's about trying to, what's the word? Like, not control your life, because you can't control the world, but the things that we can control, such as like our schedule, such as notifications, we can set those up in a way that is helpful. I hear you, Aisha. And so, okay, so that's good. And then we're getting towards the end here. I'm sure you're all excited. So it's good to also think about what self-care isn't, right? It doesn't have to be anything. So it doesn't have to be quiet. This is why I called it self-care is more than meditation. It doesn't have to be quiet meditation. It could be, and I do this all the time, listening to music, blasting loud, and singing and dancing, because it just gets some of that nervous energy, anxious energy out. It gets some of these feelings out, and nobody is harmed in the process because nobody can hear me. So I think that's good. And I think the other thing is thinking about it not in terms of like how having to fix yourself, but how to be kind to yourself and care for yourself. We've talked about a little bit. And that it doesn't have to necessarily be relaxing either, right? A workout, like I went for a good swim today. It stopped raining for half an hour. I went to the pool and I went for a swim. And like, I felt so much better afterwards. And it was great. And so that's not relaxing. It wasn't relaxing. It didn't feel relaxing, but it felt really good. And I felt better afterwards. And that's essentially how you're going to figure this out, right? If you try these things and you feel, and you can, the trick is being able to take a moment after you've done the activity or during the activity to assess how it makes you feel. Do I feel my heart rate calming down? Do I feel less pressure? Do I feel like I'm slowing down? Do I feel like I'm in a particular moment? Self-care is about being in the present and not worrying about the future or the past, whichever way the future and the past happens to be. So here it is again. I'm really going to need to work on that. I probably shouldn't talk about it out loud either, but so one of the things I like to think about is like micro care, right? So the areas where that matters the most are things like when you feel overwhelmed or overstimulated, right? And that's that, like you've had 4 meetings in a row and you just keep going and going, and you're so tired, but you're so wired at the same time. Your body needs rest and it needs to slow down. And the way to do that is to think about what are the things that make you feel calm and collected in the present. So some examples here, creating a sense
So buttons.
Drinking a slow glass of water, right? Not just drinking water, but drinking it slowly. Counting your breaths is one that I use all the time. Just breathe in, breathe out, 1. Breathe in, breathe out, 2. If you can breathe in and breathe out for longer, that's really the key. So,
So buttons.
or 6 breaths, like so. You can breathe
So
in.
buttons.
You can breathe in for 4, and you can breathe in for 4, and you can breathe out for 6. when I first started to do that, my lungs were not the greatest things in the world. And so it was easier for me to do 3/5. So I would breathe in for 3 and out for 5. And I use that as an example of just like, it doesn't matter what numbers you use as long as you're breathing in less than you're exhaling, because that tells your body it's safe. It's okay to calm down. Even like a nature microdose, right? Like opening up a window, or, and taking a long way to the car, or, walking when you could have driven when it's just a short trip, things like that, where it's like, how do you fit? It's even like the route that you take is the route that you're taking through, lots of streets and buildings, or is there a way that maybe is a few minutes longer, but you're passing through nature, you're seeing cows on the side of the road, or, whatever it is, you're seeing a river or something, right? Like even little things like that make a difference, because it's just an extra moment that you weren't giving yourself before, that you're now giving yourself. And then I think there's one more here. So we talked about this a little bit, but it's okay. Sorry. So there it is again. Mindful technology, which is really just thinking about how you use technology and how the purpose that you use it with, right? Like, so, we spend an enormous amount of time with our phones or on computers, but we are often reactive because we get these notifications, and then it's like, oh, let me look at this, and then I'm looking at this, and it's like, oh wow, then there's this, and there's, right? Like the social media apps, websites, etc., are built to suck us in, right? So the fact that we get sucked in is not a flaw in our personality; it's reality of who we are. That's why they built them this way. Okay, so how can you help control that if that's what you want to do? Set a timer. I'm only going to look at Instagram for 10 minutes or whatever it is, right? It's a lot of self-care is about being more intentional. Oh, Dan's back. I missed him coming back in. So a big part of self-care is being intentional and thinking about, okay, what do I actually need, or what do I actually want, right? So when you pick up that phone and you have an intention to do something, do you see the notifications and get distracted by them and then put your phone back down and be like, wait, I grabbed my phone for a reason, right? We've all done that. How do you help to just manage that a little bit better? How do you help let yourself be in control of this behavior instead of this device being more in control of you? Because the sense of helplessness that can happen when you're scrolling for so long, the sense of like time wasted, or feeling like you've lost time that you could have been doing something else, can be upsetting and difficult, and can be it can add weights to your backpack, and it can detract from your soul points. Wow, that was a really tough one. So it's like, Mary talking about her boss. We want to do the same kind of thing with our phones. Set a boundary, decide what that boundary is, and then be understanding with ourselves when we make mistakes, because we're going to make mistakes. It's no sense in beating ourselves up over that, right? It's not like I've never spent way too much time looking at Instagram or something, right? Like, it happens. But does it happen every day? No, because I don't want it to. Okay, so we'll talk about this a little bit, right? Because we're coming up to the end and I don't want to keep you long. what counts as care for you that you might dismissed in the past. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on that somehow I managed to forget is that with the 6 dimensions and all the different options of self-care, are there things that you're already doing as self-care that you didn't know, that you weren't aware of? I think that's important to be able to acknowledge, like, oh yeah, I'm already doing this and I'm doing this and I'm doing this for self-care. That's great. I also, at the same time, want you to be able to see, you know what, to add this and this and this wouldn't be that difficult either. I could probably do those pretty simply. And so just, when I send this around, take a chance to be able to sort of see what are the things, because again, the idea is to, and I don't know why it's set up like a book, but to have a toolkit of different things that you can turn to for self-care. Again, thinking about which dimensions do you not pay the most attention to, which dimensions do you ignore for yourself, and maybe that's something to focus a little bit more on moving forward. And then thinking about how you implement new self-care activities and any successes that you have, and enjoying those successes and celebrating those successes. And if you fail, whatever, right? Like, so you try something else. This is not a all or nothing. It's not like you either do self-care or you don't do self-care. It's just how much of self-care are we doing for ourselves? And the more we can do, the better we're going to feel. But also some days suck and it's not going to happen as well as other days. And we just need to be okay with that. So I think that wraps us up. I am going to review something real quick, and then I'll open the floor to questions. If you have questions, I'm happy to stay on. If you don't have questions or you just want to go on to whatever's next in your life, you can do that. You know about the self-care guide. I talked to you a little bit about the work I do with AI and mental health. I call them digital ally sessions. I'm happy to talk more about that. And I think that's it, right? And then you'll see that when I send that around. Okay, does anyone have any questions? First of all, thank you very much. Okay, Dan, let me just address Dan's earlier question about crying. And so I don't know if you ever saw Shrinking. Shrinking is a absolutely delightful show on Apple TV Plus, and I make no money off of this referral, by the way, but it's a really good show. It's a terrible example of therapists for the most part, so don't think about it that way. But one of the therapists says you need to take, when you're dealing with something difficult and it feels like it's taking over your life, you just need to give it like 15 minutes a day. And I've done that for a while, like a long time ago. Yes, exactly, Dan. I'm sorry, Leah, I'm not sure what I'll just show it again. So right, like taking 5 minutes, taking 15 minutes to just cry, it does two things. One, it's a great way to process feelings that are really difficult to speak, right? There are injuries that we experienced as children before we learned how to talk or effectively express ourselves that may be difficult to put into words. There may be experiences that we've had as adults that are just difficult in words. We just may not be that good with expressing pain and loss. Crying is a really effective way of doing that. When you set a time limit to it, it allows you a certain amount of stability during the rest of the day, because you know, okay, I'm going to take care of these feelings at this particular time, and I'm going to, and that's when I'm going to deal with it. So I don't have to worry about it right now. That's one of the great things about.
Jeremy, when you say crying without shame, what do you mean by without shame?
There's nothing wrong with crying is all I'm saying, right? So if you're like, I think the problem is people see crying as a weakness. Thanks, Suzanne. People see crying as a weakness, or people, particularly, right, men, see it as a weakness, see it as, it means that they're not strong enough to handle what's going on. And I argue it's the complete opposite. It's the willingness to face the intensity of those feelings that may only be able to be expressed through tears. That's courage. Awesome. Anybody else have any questions?
Why does self-care feel like a chore sometimes? Like, I know that I have to eat nutritiously and have food in the house, but yet I will not go food shopping for 3 months. Like, and like, take care of the apartment, or is it just like depression or ADHD or what? Like, what the heck?
I mean, I think what some of it has to do with, and it could be a whole slew of things, right?
Yeah.
But what I find particularly with self-care is there isn't, it's a little bit harder, particularly in the beginning, to see the correlation between I did this action, I feel this way.
Okay. Yeah, that's something new that I learned tonight. Yeah.
And so I think that if, let's just say you set aside time to be able to do shopping, right? But then when you ate, you were able to think about, oh, look, I put the time in to get this food and I'm enjoying this food. Those two start to correlate a little bit better together.
Oh, so then it makes it easier.
It might. I mean,
it's like the integration. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was a good question.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Going once, going twice. Okay, so thank you, everybody, especially those of you that managed to stay a little over. Thank you for your 4 minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeremy.
You're welcome. And I will let you know when the next one is. I think it's in 2 weeks. And I'll share the deck and the recording and info about the other workshop that I do probably tomorrow. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thank you.